There is a very particular sound that fills a room when an entire empire built on deceit crumbles into dust. It is never an explosion or a loud crash. It is a sudden, suffocating silence, the kind where 300 wealthy and influential people stop, breathing all at once, their crystal wine glasses freezing halfway to their lips. I stood on that brightly lit stage beneath the glare of the auditorium spotlights, holding the solid crystal trophy of the National Surgical Fellowship in my hands, looking directly into the front row. Down there sat the man who had stolen my father's life work, who had told every relative we had that I was an incompetent dropout, and who had left me to freeze in an empty car in the dead of winter. Looking into his pale, horrified face, I leaned into the microphone, let the low hum of the audio system settle over the room, and spoke the words that would destroy his carefully constructed world forever. If you have ever known what it feels like to be kicked when you are down, or to watch someone rob you of your future, while the rest of your family claps and looks away, stay with me until the very end. This is the story of how my uncle thought he could bury my dreams, completely forgetting that some seeds are meant to grow through concrete. To understand how sweet that silence tasted, you have to understand where my journey actually began. My name is Adrian Cross. My father, Marcus Cross, was not just an ordinary physician. He was a pioneering cardiovascular surgeon who spent 30 years building Cross Memorial Surgical Center in Chicago from a small community clinic into one of the most respected private cardiac facilities in the Midwest. My father was a man of immense intellect and endless kindness, but his greatest flaw was his complete inability to see malice in the people he loved. He believed that everyone possessed the same moral compass as his own, and that fatal blindness ultimately cost him everything. When my mother passed away during my late teens, my father threw himself into his operating room, working 14-hour shifts to numb the grief. During that vulnerable period, his younger brother, Harrison Cross, moved back into the city. Harrison was a corporate consultant who had ruined 2 regional medical supply companies through embezzlement and reckless spending. But Harrison had a silver tongue and an extraordinary talent for playing the devoted, supportive brother. He brought meals to our home, helped my father organize the administrative chaos of the expanding surgical center, and slowly convinced my father that he needed a dedicated business manager so he could focus entirely on saving patients. My father trusted him completely. Within 3 years, Harrison had legally appointed himself as the chief executive officer of the administrative board, quietly securing power of attorney over the facility and the family financial holdings. During this time, I had earned admission into the prestigious Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, embarking on a grueling 6-year surgical doctorate. My father was immensely proud of me. To ensure I would never carry the burden of debt, he established a locked, legally binding educational escrow fund containing $220,000, structured to pay my tuition, clinical fees, and housing directly to the university until the day of my graduation. Then came the freezing December night that permanently shattered my life. My father suffered a massive, sudden myocardial infarction while reviewing patient charts in his office. He collapsed directly onto his desk, and despite the frantic efforts of his own trauma team, he could not be revived. I received the phone call at 3 in the morning in my Baltimore apartment, feeling as though the ground beneath my feet had opened up and swallowed me whole. I rushed back to Chicago to bury the only parent I had left. Before the grief had even begun to set in, Harrison called an urgent meeting with the estate attorneys. At the reading of the trust documents, Harrison arrived in a custom 3-piece suit, flanked by 2 aggressive corporate lawyers. He presented an updated codicil, purportedly signed by my father just 2 months before his death, granting Harrison full discretionary oversight of all family trusts and operational control of Cross Memorial until I had completed my medical residency and obtained full board certification. Harrison embraced me in the law office with tears in his eyes, promising that my father's legacy was in safe hands and urging me to focus entirely on finishing my final year of surgical rotations. I was young, emotionally exhausted, and desperate for family support. I trusted him. I did not realize that I had just handed the keys of my life to a ruthless predator. For the next 10 months, I buried my pain in the hospital. I worked 80-hour clinical weeks in the trauma wards, mastering complex vascular sutures, assisting in emergency bypass surgeries, and writing an extensive research thesis on biosynthetic valve integration. My professors recognized my potential, and I was on track to graduate at the very top of my class with honors. Then, 3 weeks before the start of my final semester, I was called into the Dean of Medicine's administrative office. Dean Evelyn Vance, a renowned neurosurgeon known for her stern but fair demeanor, slid a red-stamped administrative letter across her desk. The letter was a formal notice of immediate academic suspension. The final tuition balance of $48,000 was 2 months overdue, and the university was legally obligated to revoke my clinical privileges and bar me from the graduation roster. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harrison immediately, assuming there had been an international wire glitch or a clerical mix-up with the bank. I called 4 times before he finally answered. Through the receiver, I could hear the background jazz music and clinking silverware of a high-end country club. I explained the situation in a frantic, trembling rush, telling him that the university was about to expel me and that the final tuition wire had never been released from the escrow. Harrison took a slow, theatrical breath. His voice was smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. He informed me that the surgical center had encountered severe financial liabilities and that the board had conducted an emergency capital review. He told me that Cross Memorial could no longer justify funding an expensive academic vanity project. I stood frozen in the dean's hallway, the blood rushing into my ears. I told him that the money in the educational trust belonged to my father, meant specifically for my medical degree. Harrison let out a patronizing chuckle. He said that under the terms of the conservatorship, all liquid trust distributions were entirely at the managing director's discretion. He told me that they had reviewed my mid-year evaluations and decided that I simply lacked the natural talent to become a top-tier surgeon. Then he delivered the blow that took the air out of my lungs. He stated that the remaining liquid funds had already been reallocated into an executive fellowship for his own son, Derek Cross, who had just been brought in as the new vice president of operations for the hospital network. He told me to accept reality, stop bothering him, and look into becoming a medical sales representative before hanging up the phone. The cruelty escalated rapidly over the next 48 hours. My phone lit up with dozens of furious messages and voicemails from aunts, uncles, cousins, and lifelong family friends. Harrison had called an emergency family gathering and sent letters to our entire medical circle. He crafted a completely false, malicious narrative, claiming that I had suffered a psychological breakdown, had fallen into severe prescription drug abuse, had squandered my tuition funds on underground gambling, and had flunked out of Johns Hopkins in utter disgrace. He portrayed himself as the selfless, heartbroken uncle who had tried to save me for months, only to be forced to cut me off to preserve the family's good name. Because Harrison was the wealthy executive running a multi-million-dollar hospital, and I was just an exhausted, 24-year-old student, everyone accepted his lies without question. When I tried to call my relatives to explain, they hung up on me. When I sent screenshots of my stellar academic transcript, they blocked my number, accusing me of lying and demanding that I enter rehab. I remember walking out into the freezing Baltimore rain that evening, sitting on the cold curb outside my apartment building, staring at a total bank account balance of $43. Under the legal charter of Cross Memorial Surgical Center, there was a specific clause. If my father's direct heir failed to obtain an official medical license within 5 years of his passing, all ancestral ownership and 51% majority voting stock would permanently transfer to the active managing board. Harrison was not merely refusing to pay my tuition. He was deliberately bankrupting me to ensure I could never graduate, legally securing my father's entire life's work as his personal property forever. As the icy rain soaked through my clothes, something inside me hardened. The despair and the grief burned away, leaving behind a cold, absolute resolve. I looked down at my trembling hands. They were steady. They were my father's hands. The next morning, I walked straight into the office of Dean Evelyn Vance. I did not ask for pity, and I did not offer excuses. I placed my complete research thesis, my clinical performance logs, and the bank statements documenting the sudden trust freeze on her desk. Dean Vance spent an hour reviewing my surgical logs and research data in complete silence. When she looked up, she told me that my surgical precision was rare, and that she would not allow bureaucratic cruelty to destroy a gifted doctor. She arranged an emergency university research fellowship that covered half of my outstanding tuition. That still left me with $24,000 to pay for mandatory medical malpractice insurance, clinical board exam fees, and basic living expenses. With only 4 months remaining before graduation, that was the moment I entered the most brutal period of my life. Every single day, from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, I completed advanced surgical rotations, performed complex vascular procedures, and finalized my clinical research. At 5 o'clock, I would walk to a private taxi depot in the industrial district of the city. From 6 in the evening until 4:30 in the morning, 7 days a week, I drove a yellow cab through the roughest, coldest neighborhoods of Baltimore. I transported late-night factory workers, emergency hospital staff, and intoxicated bar patrons through blizzards, freezing sleet, and dark alleys. My life became a battle against total physical collapse. I slept 2 hours a night in the back seat of the cab parked in the hospital garage, surviving on instant black coffee, hard-boiled eggs, and cheap bread. My eyes were perpetually bloodshot, my muscles ached constantly, and my fingers were stiff from the cold steering wheel. But every single time my eyelids grew heavy, every time my body begged me to quit, I pictured Harrison sitting in my father's office, wearing my father's watch, telling the world that I was a failure. I would wipe the frost from the windshield, put the car in gear, and whisper into the dark, "I will finish this, and you will answer for every lie." During those long midnight shifts, I did not just drive. I investigated. Through a former compliance officer who had worked under my father for over a decade before Harrison dismissed her, I obtained the internal financial audit files Harrison had filed with the probate court to justify freezing my tuition. Harrison was arrogant, and arrogant men always make fatal mistakes because they believe they are too clever to ever be caught. When I analyzed the financial reports, the fraud was staggering. To legally justify withholding my educational payments, Harrison had forged my signature on 16 separate cash withdrawal vouchers, claiming I had secretly taken out $250,000 from the hospital's operational accounts for personal use. However, Harrison was technologically illiterate. He had simply copied and pasted a low-resolution scan of my signature from a 2017 high school sports consent form. On every single forged document, there was an identical, microscopic digital ink blotch at the end of the letter A, an undeniable digital fingerprint proving the documents were fabrications. Furthermore, I uncovered the truth behind Derek's sudden rise to prominence. Derek was preparing to present the hospital's newest clinical achievement, a revolutionary artificial cardiac valve that Cross Memorial had just patented and secured a $16 million state health grant to produce. Harrison was marketing Derek as a young medical genius who had designed the device from scratch. When I gained access to the hospital's encrypted research servers through my father's old administrator credentials, the truth became blindingly clear. Derek had not designed anything. Harrison had access to my father's private cloud storage from 4 years prior, taken my father's complete, unpublished engineering schematics for the cardiac valve, erased my father's name from the digital blueprints, and registered Derek as the sole inventor. They were building their entire reputation on the stolen genius of a dead man. I knew that filing a standard lawsuit would only result in years of expensive litigation, where Harrison would use my father's money to bleed me dry while my licensing deadline expired. I needed a public platform where the evidence could not be hidden, buried, or settled behind closed doors. The perfect opportunity arrived in the form of the annual Midwest Medical Laureate Gala, the single most prestigious event in the regional healthcare industry. The gala was attended by federal health officials, Supreme Court justices, university presidents, and national media. That year, the gala was hosting the national presentation of the Hippocratic Gold Medal and the Surgical Fellowship of the Year, an honor that included an immediate $100,000 unrestricted research grant and fast-tracked medical licensing. Harrison had purchased the center VIP table right in front of the main stage for $20,000 using the hospital's corporate card. He had invited our entire extended family, regional politicians, and press reporters, planning to use the night to announce Derek's appointment as Chief Medical Director and solidify his permanent control over Cross Memorial. What Harrison did not know was that Dean Vance had secretly submitted my completed surgical thesis and cardiac valve research to the National Review Board under an independent academic evaluation. The night of the gala arrived. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House was filled with 400 guests in formal attire, illuminated by towering crystal chandeliers. Harrison Cross sat at table 1, dressed in an expensive velvet dinner jacket, smoking a cigar and loudly bragging to a federal health commissioner about how he had saved Cross Memorial from bankruptcy after my father's death. Next to him sat Derek, smiling smugly, soaking in the admiration. My aunts, uncles, and cousins surrounded them, laughing at Harrison's jokes and praising his success. I entered the ballroom quietly through the back catering entrance. I was wearing a simple, tailored black suit that I had rented using the money from my final night of driving the taxi. My head was held high, my posture was flawless, and my mind was entirely focused. I took a seat in the back row, blending into the shadows. At 8:30 sharp, the room lights dimmed. The Vice-Chancellor of the Medical Consortium and Dean Vance stepped onto the stage to announce the winner of the Surgical Fellow of the Year and the recipient of the Hippocratic Gold Medal. Dean Vance spoke into the microphone, her voice commanding the attention of every person in the hall. She described a young surgeon who had overcome unimaginable hardship, who had driven a taxi through the night to fund his own education, and who had developed a groundbreaking cardiac innovation that would save countless lives. Down at table 1, Harrison smiled broadly and patted Derek firmly on the back, signaling for him to adjust his tie and prepare to walk to the stage. Derek stood halfway up, grinning at the surrounding family members. Dean Vance looked out into the crowd and announced the name, Dr. Adrian Cross. The silence that fell over table 1 was absolute. Derek froze mid-motion, his hands caught on his jacket lapels. Harrison's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, crashing against the floor and shattering into 100 pieces, spilling across his polished shoes. A powerful spotlight sliced through the dim room, bypassing the front tables entirely, and locked onto me standing in the back row. The entire hall erupted into applause, I walked down the central red carpet with steady, deliberate steps. As I passed table 1, I did not look at my aunts, who were staring with wide, horrified eyes. I looked directly into Harrison's face. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by an ashen, terrifying realization. I climbed the stage steps. Dean Vance placed the heavy gold medal around my neck, handed me the crystal trophy, and stepped aside, giving me the podium. I looked out over the sea of 400 influential figures, adjusted the microphone, and let the room fall completely silent. I spoke calmly, telling the audience that 4 months ago, a vicious rumor had been spread throughout the medical community, claiming that I had abandoned my studies, fallen into addiction, and failed out of medical school. Murmurs of confusion spread across the room. Harrison stood up abruptly from his seat, his face flushing dark crimson, shouting that this was a private matter and demanding that security turn off my microphone. Dean Vance immediately signaled security to stand down, ordering the hall to let the award recipient finish his address. I pointed directly down at Harrison, stating clearly that the man who created those lies was standing right there. I detailed how Harrison had used a fraudulent conservatorship to freeze my tuition funds to force my expulsion, attempting to steal my father's hospital through an equity forfeiture clause. I described the nights in the taxi, the freezing cold, the 2 hours of sleep, and the $24,000 earned in exhaust fumes and blistered hands. The ballroom was so quiet that the faint hum of the air system was audible. I picked up the remote control on the podium and pressed the button. The massive 50-foot projection screens behind the stage illuminated with high-definition digital forensic files. On the left side appeared the 16 forged withdrawal slips, magnified 10 times, revealing the identical 2017 digital printer flaw in every single signature. On the right side appeared the original CAD engineering metadata for the $16 million cardiac valve, displaying my father Marcus Cross's cryptographic digital signature dated 4 years earlier, proving that Derek's entire project was an outright theft of a deceased surgeon's work. I looked directly at the journalists in the front row, whose cameras were flashing continuously, and announced that the complete evidentiary package, along with financial audits and sworn affidavits, had been delivered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division and the State Medical Licensing Board 2 hours prior. Chaos erupted across the grand ballroom. The federal commissioners and board members sitting at table 1 immediately pushed their chairs away, distancing themselves from Harrison and Derek in disgust. My relatives sat frozen in absolute shame, unable to meet anyone's gaze as the undeniable proof glowed above them. Harrison lost all composure, charging toward the stage stairs in a blind rage, shouting profanities and screaming that he built the firm. Before he could reach the first step, 4 security officers tackled him to the carpet, pinning his arms behind his back and securing heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. As they dragged him through the main doors, the flashing blue and red emergency lights of 3 federal law enforcement vehicles were already illuminating the towering glass facade of the building. I stood alone at the podium under the warm lights. I touched the gold medal on my chest, closed my eyes for a single moment, and felt the immense weight of the past 5 years lift from my shoulders. I looked toward the ceiling, feeling my father's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside me in the operating room, and whispered into the microphone, "Dad, the work continues." The entire auditorium, professors, surgeons, judges, and colleagues, rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation that echoed throughout the hall. Within 8 months, the legal retribution was complete. Harrison was convicted on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, grand embezzlement, and document forgery, receiving an 11-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. Derek was stripped of his medical credentials, permanently banned from holding any administrative or clinical post in healthcare, and left financially ruined. The courts dissolved the conservatorship immediately, returning 100% of the controlling shares and all recovered assets of Cross Memorial Surgical Center to me. Today, my father's hospital is expanding. Our family name has been fully vindicated, and every single surgery we perform is built on unwavering integrity. Those who build their lives on deception always forget a fundamental truth. A building constructed on rot can only stand for so long before the weight of reality brings it crashing down. If this journey through betrayal and ultimate vindication spoke to you, share your support and join our community for more true accounts of resilience and justice. Tell me in the comments below, what is the most unforgettable moment of real-life justice you have ever seen? Until next time, stay resilient, protect your integrity, and never let anyone take what is rightfully yours.